VikesNow. I'm Dustin Baker. We have gotten underneath the 2-week threshold, 13 days away from the NFL draft. It is the ultimate reality TV spectacle in sports because there is no sports being played, but you learn dudes' stories, you learn their draft stock, you learn their bios, and there's no better man to walk us through it than Josh Frey, who's here today. How's it going, sir?
It's good. I appreciate the hyped up intro. So hopefully I live up to it today.
Oh no, you deserve it, my man. You should. The guys and gals listening, he put up his draft board. Was it top 100 or top 150?
Top 50.
Top 50.
Top.
Okay. And yeah, that is up on purpleptsd.com of all the prospects because inevitably, hopefully, the Vikings get at least one, maybe two, maybe three of those guys. But what we're going to do today, for very succinct Vikings purposes, is I think the most pressing needs for the team, you can debate the order until you're blue in the face, are cornerback, which is a CB, quarterback, QB, if you want to plan for the future, wide receiver, because Adam Thielen left, and then off-ball linebacker that I'm increasingly paranoid about because what if something happens to Jordan Hicks or what if something happens to Brian Asamoah? You're going to turn to Troy Dye. And therefore, not even suggesting like if Asamoah doesn't look the part or Jordan Hicks is just a placeholder. What if one of them gets hurt? So that leads me to believe that off-ball linebacker has to be a draft priority or like a Zach Cunningham or Deion Jones on the free agent market. I digress. We're going to go through Josh's top 7 from each one of those big categories for the Vikings purposes, and it starts now. We'll start with the least sexiest of the 4 positions that I've named, and that's off-ball linebacker. In any order in which you'd like to present them, give me your top 7 and a brief speech on each.
All right. So off-ball linebackers, I'll start just at number 7 and we'll work our way up the list. I'm going to go with the guy that you probably could consider an edge as well as an off-ball linebacker. I'm going DeMarvion Overshown out of Texas. This dude, he's an incredible pass rusher, and he's slowly developing a little bit more of a pass coverage skill as well. But he definitely needs to work a little bit more on that. But pass rusher right away, you'll have that on him. Number 6. I'm going a little bit of a homer take here. I'm going Nick Herbig out of Wisconsin. I'm a big Badgers fan. I think that this dude is one of the best pass coverage linebackers in this class. He needs to get a little bit bigger, build into his frame a little bit more, I think. But he's a guy that you can plug in and he's going to know what he has to do in pass coverage. And then working up to top 5. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. I think a lot of these guys, they kind of are really close together. But I'm going Henry To'oTo'o out of Alabama. We've talked about him a couple times on this show. He's moved down a little bit on my list recently, but he's another guy that you can just plug in pass coverage. He's going to know what to do. He's been there before. He's played in a lot of big games at Alabama, and I think that means a lot. Number 4.
If you're a writer, he's a tricky name to spell.
He is a very tricky name to spell. I've had to do that a couple times and look back and fix it. Where's the T go? Where's the O go? Where's the apostrophe? And then number 4, another guy that we've talked about on this show a few times, Noah Sewell out of Oregon. Just the best motor, I think, honestly, in this entire class. He's got sideline to sideline speed. He's never going to take a snap off. He needs to work. He's another guy that needs to get a little bit bigger, I think, to truly have an impact in the running game and run defense. But he's a guy, again, he's going to know what he has to do. You got to be able to count on him to show up every single snap. Then moving into the top 3, I think this has gotten a lot tougher for me in the past couple weeks. But I'm going Jack Campbell out of Iowa at number 3. Just a massive guy. Like, you can plug him in. He's going to compete with a lot of the offensive linemen in terms of his blitzing ability, run defense. He's just spectacular. Pass rush. I'm a little bit concerned about him being able to step back into coverage just because of how big he is. Like, he's honestly like the size of DeMarvion Overshown, who's basically an edge. So he's a guy that you could probably plug into either one of those spots as well, but he's working on towards getting a little bit better in the pass coverage. So hopefully he gets better there. Number 2, this dude's flying up boards all over the place. Arkansas, Drew Sanders. He's
even in the first round.
Yeah, for sure. Like, he's a guy that at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if he went in the first round because of how good he is in terms of his pass rush. We talked about him, I think last week, even he started out as an edge at Alabama, transferred to Arkansas and took over that off-ball linebacker role. And he just filled up box scores, tackles, TFLs, sacks, pass defense. Like, for a guy that's basically only played 1 year in pass coverage, he looks really dang good. Like he's definitely still raw, but you can see that he definitely works at it. And you get him into an offense or into a defense with it in the NFL, give him a couple of years to truly dial in what he's doing. And I think he can turn into maybe one of the better defenders in this entire class. And then number one, I'm keeping him there.
You're
I'm
staying
stubborn.
loyal.
I'm staying loyal. Clemson, Trenton Simpson. I just think that if you want a guy that can step into a defense right away, I think he's the best all around player at this position. He defends the pass really well. He can blitz. He's a sneaky good pass rusher too, out of the interior of a defense. He can sneak in through the guards there and find way through the A gap. So yeah, if you want to go get a linebacker in the first round, that's still the guy that I'm going after.
All right, I'm throwing a curveball at you on the fly, and you weren't prepared for this.
Right.
I think you should be reasonably close to formulating your official Vikings draft predictions for the guys and gals. If you had to predict which one of these guys, or maybe none of them, ends up with the Vikings.
I think if they're going to target a linebacker, it's probably Drew Sanders.
Okay.
That just makes the most sense, especially if they trade down, like we've talked about. That seems like the most likely route for them to take. If they trade down into the early second, maybe even late first, I could definitely see them going and getting him, because in a Brian Flores defense, he's going to thrive. Like he's going to be able to do all the things, blitzing, step back into coverage that you want a linebacker to do.
Okay. And I will tell everybody that you should firmly expect some semblance of off-ball linebacker to come out of this draft because of what I mentioned earlier. If something happens in training camp or preseason to one of those guys, you're looking at a defense by a linebacker-focused defensive coordinator who only has Troy Dye, and I don't see that happening. Of course, they could squash all this and assign a free agent like 10 minutes from now, but they probably would have already done that. All right, so let's see. Let's do cornerback next. CB. Wide receivers are always the most fun because of Vikings history, and quarterback because it's the most important in the sport. We'll get to that number one. But number 7 on the cornerback list, the Vikings' most pressing need, in my opinion.
CB7, I'm going Cam Smith out of South Carolina. He's a super physical corner, and he's great in man coverage. So I think that if you're a fan of that type of player, he probably moves up the board a little bit more for you. I just think he gets a little bit too aggressive and he gets a little too handsy, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to get away with that at the NFL level as much as he did in college, especially in the SEC, where you don't call a lot of plays there or a lot of flags there. So moving up the list, I'm going Emmanuel Forbes, Mississippi State.
Tiny guy.
He's not very big, but he plays tough. Like he plays a lot bigger than his 166 pounds would suggest. Like he definitely needs to get bigger, and if he doesn't get bigger, he's going to have some problems in the NFL. But I feel like he's definitely got the frame where he can add at least another 10, 15 pounds onto him and be just fine. And he's got terrific speed. He's a 4'4" guy. He can keep up with even the fastest wide receivers. He'd probably step into the slot if you really needed to right away, and maybe just throw him in there. And then the size doesn't become as big of an issue either. So that's where I have him at number 6. Number 5, I've flip-flop all over the place with this top 5. Again, it gets tough this time of year, especially, but I'm going Deonte Banks out of Maryland. This is probably where we're looking, where the Vikings are probably going to pick. That this is probably the most likely scenario for him to land. I think that he's got great coverage skills, especially man coverage, press coverage. He's got decent size, and again, he's just another guy, super athletic. He can keep up with the fastest guys in the league, and that's what you want in a first round corner, a guy that you can step in right away, play some press man coverage, especially again Brian Flores defense. You're going to be playing a lot of one-on-one coverage there. Moving up. This one, I've seen a lot of people lower on this guy, and I'm not super convinced why, but Kelee Ringo out of Georgia. He's massive, 6'2", 210 pounds, something like that. And he runs a 4.4, and he's got great technique, super physical, impress. I don't really see a ton of flaws with him. I'm not sure why people aren't expecting him to go in the first round. I see like he doesn't have the quickest feet in the world, but I think size makes up a lot of that for him. And I would be a little surprised to see him not go in the first round because of the traits that he shows. Moving in the top 3, I wouldn't be surprised any of these remaining three went in the top 10, so don't expect them to be Vikings come a couple weeks from now. But Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State got the longest arms that I've really ever seen in a corner. He's got ridiculous wingspan, which just allows him to just completely drape all over a receiver, make plays where nobody should have any business making plays. And he's, again, super athletic, 4.4 speed, all the stuff that you want in a top corner prospect. And I think that he's gonna if he gets into especially a Philly defense where they've already got a bunch of studs and he just has to do some things here and there, I think he could really thrive in that sort of role. Number 2, Christian Gonzalez, super athletic corner out of Oregon. He's got the length, not quite as big as Porter, but I think he's instinctually, he knows what he's doing in coverage a little bit more. He's got a long history of starting experience, and he's got some really great ball skills as well. So he can go out and make a play for you in the secondary. And then number 1, far and away, especially after he ran a 4.4 the other day in his pro day, I'm going Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois. If he went in the top 3, I wouldn't be super surprised. Like if Arizona just sat and picked, if they lost Byron Murphy and Patrick Peterson to the Vikings in the past 3 years. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just sat there, picked, and if they don't want to take an edge, they want to shore up that secondary, Witherspoon's a great way to go.
So you said in tandem with your on the fly mock draft, Sanders, after they've traded back, and Ringo would be perhaps part of that plan if he fell into the second round or something?
Yeah, if he falls in the second round, I wouldn't be super surprised if the Vikings just took him there because, again, I think he's got some great potential. He never really messed up at Georgia, so I really, again, I'm not super convinced why he's not higher on a lot of people's boards. I had him honestly CB1 for a while, but just watching Witherspoon, Porter, Gonzalez, and how instinctual they are in coverage and how just technically sound that they are every single snap, I think that they are the top 3 for sure. But Ringo, I wouldn't be upset about taking him at all.
So gun to your head, no matter your personal opinion about them staying put, the impact player that Kwesi talked about yesterday, or trading down like we kind of think they'll do, is it more likely that they select Ringo or your guy Brian Branch when it's all said and done?
I think I'd still go Brian Branch just because I feel like there's a decent chance that he's there at 23, especially if, I don't know, if wide receivers fly off the board early, for say, like if Washington, Green Bay take receivers, I think that there's a really good chance that he falls to 23. Or I wouldn't rule out if these corners start going early, maybe the Vikings move up a couple spots and try to snag one of these guys, because it really feels like the secondary is the biggest need right now for this team. So I still think I'd pick Branch over Ringo.
And that's your prediction, you're saying? Because I think you want Branch on top of it as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So you somehow, and in some form, have Sanders and Ringo finding their way to the Vikings, which means they probably won't have room for one of these stud wide receivers unless it's a guy falls later and they've traded back a bunch. But nevertheless, that's our segue. Start with number 7, wide receiver.
Number 7, this is where it gets fun. I think the wide receiver group is a little bit slept on because a lot of these NFL teams have been saying that Jackson Smith-Njigba is the only guy with a first round grade. So I think that that's kind of halted a lot of the media. Like, whoa, what's going on here? But there is some talent here. Tank Dell, he's number 7 out of Houston. Great slot guy. He can go up and make a contested catch whenever you need him to. He's really small, but he plays like he's 3 inches taller, 20 pounds bigger than what he actually is. Like, he's the toughest MFer and on the field every single time he steps out there. So I'd be really happy about him with a day 2 pick as well. Number 6, I'm going Jalen Hyatt. I'm a little worried about this one just because he's basically been a guy throughout his collegiate career that he's great deep threat, but he doesn't do a ton else other than that. Like the entire Tennessee offense this year was basically just Hendon Hooker throwing it 40 yards downfield and him bringing it in and then going and getting a touchdown. So that was a lot of what they did. He doesn't have a really developed route tree yet, but he's got the size, he's got the speed. If he can work on that, he's going to be a pretty good wide receiver in the league. And then number 5, I am going to go with Cedric Tillman, another Tennessee wide receiver. I think he's the most slept on guy in this class. If if there's a guy that's a surprise wide receiver that goes in round one, I think that it's him.
Wow.
And yeah, I think that this upcoming mock draft, I actually selected him to go into the first round. So
Yeah.
keep an eye out for that. He's a great route runner. He's a lot more physical than Jalen Hyatt is. So I think that yeah, he'd be an awesome choice there. Number 4, going Zay Flowers out of Boston College. Another great route runner, silky smooth runner. He's got the speed as well. He's a little bit smaller, which is why he's not as high on the board as some of the other guys that are coming up. But I wouldn't be upset about taking him at all either. Number 3, I'm going Quentin Johnston out of TCU. He was my WR1 for a bit, but watching some of the drops that he has, especially short intermediate play, like he's 6'2", 220 pounds. So he's a guy that you feel like should be able to win a lot of these contested catch situations, and he just doesn't a lot of the time. But downfield, he's a great threat. He makes the jump ball catches a lot of the times down the field. So I think he's a lock to go in round 1. Honestly, I think that somebody's going to jump on just the potential, even if it's not completely filled in yet. I think that he's got great potential. And then WR2, Jordan Addison, USC. Honestly, he might be the best route runner in this entire class. And that might be part of just him stepping into that USC offense with the projected QB1 of next year's draft, along with Lincoln Riley, the head coach over there. So maybe that plays a little bit part of it. He's a little bit on the smaller side at 5'11", I think of 190, 180 pounds, something like that. But again, he plays super tough. He can run routes like nobody else in this class, and I think he's gonna be able to step into an offense and be at least a WR2 right away. And then wide receiver 1, I just feel like we have to stop overthinking it. Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State. He was WR1 for pretty much the entire summer heading into the season before he got hurt. Mm-hmm. The only real question is whether he can play on the outside, but the entire plan going into the season was for him to play on the outside at Ohio State. We just didn't get the chance to see that because he got hurt. So I don't have too much of a concern that he's going to be able to actually do that. But again, it's just a matter of probably just finding the right NFL team where he can step in. I don't know if any of these guys are really somebody you want to look at and say, you're going to be our number 1 target on day 1, like a guy like Garrett Wilson, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson over the past few years that we've seen. But these are still guys that can definitely come into an offense and contribute.
Yeah. One of the things, even when we get totally tantalized by wide receiver classes, it usually takes wide receivers a little while to get going, and Christian Watson could tell you all about it. So yeah, I think there's just this mentality that we see CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson first round explosions. But we don't realize that even it took Jefferson 3 games to be trusted. And so I would caution folks that if Zay Flowers comes on your team, no matter which team that is, and he's not like the guy getting 12 targets in week 1, well, give it some time. So based on your on the fly spitballed mock draft with Sanders and maybe Ringo to the Vikings, do they strike on any of these guys, or are they looking in rounds 3 and 4 for somebody?
I think there's a chance that Tank Dell would be there in the 3rd round. I'm not completely certain about it. And then again, it depends on how high teams actually are on Cedric Tillman too, because there hasn't been a lot of hype around him, at least going into the draft so far, at least so far in this process. A lot can happen over the next 2 weeks, obviously, but I haven't heard a ton. So maybe he's another guy that you could look at in day 2 if he falls out of the 1st round. But those would probably be the 2 that I'm looking at right now.
You are the Cedric Tillman hype source, my friend. So
yeah, we'll see.
All right, so I would consider this. So I was going to say I consider quarterback the least likely, but that's mainly in round 1. I do expect them, even after yesterday's press conference, where both team leaders said that it would be ideal. They said the same word. It would be ideal to have the guy in the building to watch and learn behind Kirk for a year, but it is not required. Which all it did was just make it even more mysterious. So, assuming that the Vikings have eyes on a quarterback to marinate for 1 season behind Kirko, give me your top 7.
All right. We're going to get a little controversial here, I think, because I've got one certain guy that's a little bit further down on the list than some might expect. But get us started. We're going Jake Haener out of Fresno State. I think he had the best out of the guys that participated in the Senior Bowl. he had by far the best performance of that weekend, and I think that matters. He made all the throws that he needed to. He showed a little bit of mobility in the pocket. He's definitely on the smaller side, kind of like a Bryce Young. I think he actually did come in at the combine at under 200 pounds, so don't super love that, but I think he's got the ball skills. Like, he's got the talent in his arm that he can become an NFL quarterback. Maybe it's not like a super terrific starter or anything, but he can step into an offense and run it if he has to. Kind of like, I guess, a Case Keenum sort of type.
Okay.
Number 6, I'm going Hendon Hooker, Tennessee. I've got him outside the top 5 just because I'm not super convinced that he can run an NFL offense. I think that Tennessee offense, he had absolutely everything that a quarterback could have possibly wanted. He had great offensive tackle talent, 3 amazing wide receivers. And this year, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman. I think those are potential first round picks. So he's got 2 guys right there that it kind of goes back to the old Ohio State thing where we didn't like those quarterbacks despite being so great in college because they just had everything around them, and it was so easy. I mean, at some point it looks easy because it just is that easy.
I think I'll mention on Hooker, I'm guessing that you read yesterday Jeremy Fowler's ESPN comps piece, which sourced anonymous executives and scouts. And the comp for Hendon Hooker, Vikings fans, is Jacoby Brissett. And
there you go.
So, yeah, you're starting to wonder, like, oh, is that what I want? Life after Kirk is Jacoby Brissett. Of course, he could be better than that, or he could suck. But yeah, to level set all of this first round smoke and it's weird that how Hendon Hooker in the first round is really a primary Vikings thing. You see it maybe in the shadows to the Ravens if Lamar's not there, but it's hilarious that Hendon Hooker in round 1 is like this. We're going to wrap our arms around it, a Vikings thing.
Yeah, I will say on Hooker, like, he does have some really good NFL traits. Like, you can't say this about a ton of QBs in this class, especially further down from Hooker, but he's got the NFL size. Like, he's 6'2", 6'3", over 200 pounds, like I think close to 215. So he's definitely got the size and the mobility if he comes back healthy. Like 2020 and 2021, he had over 600 rushing yards. So he's got the mobility there as well. If he can prove that he can make the NFL throws, you got something there, but I'm just not super convinced that it's going to happen.
You said it best offline yesterday that he's got the age too, because he's older than Justin Herbert and Jordan Love, baby.
Yeah. Even if the Vikings get their young QB, he's still older than the Packers' young QB.
Mother of God. It's like, I swear to God, when I try to warm up to him in round 1, I swear it's a Twilight Zone where I'm like, the Vikings, it's doing
the most Vikings pick.
Yeah. Here's where I stand on that. If the Vikings select Hendon Hooker at number 23, it is a very Vikings solution, but I don't think it's a Kwesi Adolphus-Mensah solution. And now those 2 worlds are married, and therefore I do not see it happening in round 1. We shall see. Who is number 5?
Number 5, I'm sticking with it. Houston Clayton Tune.
Yeah.
I think he ran an air raid offense, which again, you could knock on him just like you could with Hendon Hooker, but I think he's a little bit more dynamic in his mobility than a lot of people like to give him credit for. And I think he's got a little bit more arm talent right away than Hendon Hooker does. Like, he made some throws at Houston where you're just like, man, this guy feels like he's going to turn into something. And I don't know if it means he's a starter like year 2, or if he can be like the flash in the pan that Bailey Zappi had this year with New England when Mac Jones was out. But I feel like that there's something there, and it's hard for me to ignore it, especially he doesn't get hurt. He doesn't have that concern that Hooker does. And he's a little bit younger too, so that doesn't hurt either. So that's why I'm putting him in the top 5. I'm not super convinced why he hasn't gotten some of the hype that these other guys have gotten.
Before you get to number 4, because I'm evidently going to step on your rankings, why do you somewhat dislike Dorian Thompson-Robinson?
I think he makes too many turnover-worthy throws at this point in his career. And again, maybe that comes down to UCLA not having a ton of talent on the offensive side of the ball outside of Zach Charbonnet at the running back spot. They don't have a ton of receivers right now. But he's got – there are times where it looks like he's going to figure it out. Yeah. I'll give him that. And then it's kind of like the Anthony Richardson thing, but he's not as dynamic of an athlete where he makes us – bomb pass downfield. It looks beautiful, right on the money, and then he'll overthrow a screen and it'll be tipped and it'll be an interception or something like that. Not that extreme, obviously, but there are just some of those moments where you're like, man, that you needed to make that throw there if he's actually going to find some success at the NFL level.
Fair enough, because he's kind of a round 3 or 4 darling for the Vikings if they pass on the Hooker experience and do not trade up in the draft, or the guys you were about to mention don't fall. Who is number 4?
Number 4, I'm gonna go with Will Levis. Mm-hmm. I feel like he's a goofball, obviously, which for whatever reason is turning some NFL teams off, I guess. But I do think that he's got the potential to make some of these throws. Him and Anthony Richardson are very comparable as prospects right now, except Anthony Richardson is just the greatest athlete we've ever seen at the quarterback position. Like literally a 10.00 out of 10.00 for his RAS this spring at the combine. So I'm going to put Will Levis a little bit below him, but he's got the arm talent. He's got some of the mobility. He's built like a linebacker. Like I think that he's got what you want in terms of a prospect that's a little bit more of a project.
You mentioned the goofball persona, and the reason that turns off general managers, in my estimation, isn't that he's quirky. It's that there's immaturity. And I think if you scripted a quarterback in a lab, he'd be stoic and, the strong silent type, because otherwise it's like, is he Baker Mayfield is he Kyler Murray just going to be moody all the time? I think it's the immaturity factor rather than just being kind of weird. That's the only thing I can think of it, because who gives a shit if he puts mayonnaise in his coffee? It's the weirdest damn thing I've ever heard of, but nobody cares. All right,
it might honestly just end up being where he ends up, because if he goes to Indy, that might be a little bit of a disaster, especially considering the roller coaster ride that they've had over the past couple seasons. But if he ends up in like a Carolina, where they've got some things going on, they put a new head coach, Josh McCown's a QB coach, they got good head on their shoulders. I think they can bring him up and turn him into a pretty decent quarterback.
Yeah, and if he starts that goofy stuff or immature stuff, and he happens to be like with Belichick or a Zimmer type, they'll just bench his ass. That's all there is to it. They don't care where he was drafted. All right, so number 3 is Richardson.
Number 3 is Anthony Richardson. Got the strongest arm in this talent. Honestly, he's got the highest ceiling of prospects of recent memory, I feel like. It might even go above Trevor Lawrence, but it's just the fact that he doesn't have it all figured out in terms of his throwing mechanics right now. And maybe he figures that out this summer and he comes into his rookie year and just looks absolutely amazing. Maybe it takes 2-3 years for him to truly reach that potential, kind of like a Josh Allen type. If there is a guy that I would pick number 1 right now, honestly, it might be him, just because if you're Carolina right now and you want to get your QB of the future, you're probably not going to be super great right now, regardless of who you pick at this spot. So you're going to have another shot at this thing next year, regardless, if it doesn't work out. So sure, you could go get a CJ Stroud, who's going to be like your typical pocket passer. Or you could go get this monster of a guy that we've never seen before. I wrote a sales pitch for all 5 of these quarterbacks that are being rumored to go to the first round today. And I called Anthony Richardson the narwhal, because he's a guy that you just don't see him very often. He's real, unlike a unicorn, which is overplayed comparison for a lot of these guys. But he's just incredible to watch. And if he gets rid of some of these bad throws and keeps all of the good ones, he's going to be a stud.
Does the cyborg known as Richardson, the miniature memoir that he wrote in Players Tribune, does that move the needle at all for you, or who cares?
I was kind of in on him regardless, but it definitely makes me feel a lot better about rooting for the kid. It's just, it was a really cool thing to see.
What that did for me, and I'm sure this isn't true, but it was almost like he wanted to say, this is why you pick me over Mr. Levis.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
He was like, this is sincerity in motion, and as a writer, you can appreciate it, versus the guy who's eating bananas and doing weird things.
Whoever's coordinating his draft stuff behind the scenes did an excellent job making that decision.
Amen. All right. This is where the mystery kind of culminates. Number 2.
Number 2, CJ Stroud. He's got the highest floor of anybody in this class. I think you can plug him in right away, and he's going to be, at the very least, a very accurate pocket passer who can move around a little bit in the pocket. I don't think he's got the type of mobility that you like to see in a modern day QB, which might limit how far up the rankings that he could actually rise. Like, at best case scenario, you're probably looking at a guy like a Kirk Cousins, who's going to give you 4,000 passing yards, 30, 35 touchdowns, and complete 65, 68% of his passes every single year. But he's not going to be the guy that you're going to go into a game, you're down 10 in the fourth quarter, and you need him to make the play at that moment, and he's going to be able to do it and he's going to do it. So I think that limits his ceiling a little bit. But if you want a guy that's got a good head on his shoulders, he knows what he's doing in terms of passing the ball, that's probably the best bet right now.
All right, number 2, CJ Stroud, which gives us Bryce Young, Alabama, number 1. And does he go to the Panthers? And then tell me about him.
I don't think he's going to go to the Panthers, just because I ultimately think that they might just ride it out with CJ Stroud, just because they've got the wide receivers that they've got right now, like Thielen, they just brought in. I think they've got a lot. Chark, yeah, they've got a lot of sharp route runners that can get themselves open with some nifty moves, and I think that's kind of the guy that they want right now, because they've got talent on the offensive line too. So it's not necessarily a need for them to have a super mobile quarterback right away. Mm-hmm. So I think that Stroud makes a lot of sense especially if they want to compete for the playoffs this year, which, I mean, with all the signings that they've done in free agency, that's kind of what it feels like they want to do. And kind of feels like the NFC South is loading up all over the place to compete outside of Tampa Bay. Mm-hmm. So I think that they ultimately go Stroud, but Bryce Young, I think he's a Swiss Army knife of this class. I think he can't do anything spectacularly, but he can do everything that you want a quarterback to do. He's mobile. He can get out of the pocket, make throws on the run. He doesn't have the greatest arm in the world, just because he's like 5'8" and 180 pounds. I know what he measured in his combine, but I doubt that he actually plays at that weight. But I think he's just got that it factor about him too, where he's been in so many big games with Alabama. He knows what he's doing. And that's kind of what it just comes down to for me is, this guy, does he look like he knows what he's doing? Does he look like he's under control every single snap? And I get that feeling out of Bryce Young every single time I watch him. So I think that he's ultimately right now the best quarterback in this class.
All right. And then this one is a unicorn for us for mock draft purposes. If the Vikings exit, so April 29th, evening of the draft, with a quarterback, predict who will it be?
I really think that there's a lot about the Torian Thompson-Robinson story right now. I think they met with him at the combine. He's one of the very few quarterbacks that they've actually had a visit with so far this offseason, which I think is very telling, that they want to get to know this kid a lot more than what they already have. Maybe they swoop in and take Hooker in the first round or 23 or whatever. I mean, I'd be able to talk myself into it, I guess, but I wouldn't be super happy about it. I think if you get Thompson-Robinson, like, at that 87 spot, maybe even early day 3 in the 4th round, something like that, I think that this is a guy that you're gonna draft and stash. You might watch him in preseason and he'll make a few great plays this year, but he's not going to be a guy that immediately steps into an offense and takes over the starting role. But down the road, if he figures out some of these turnover throws and he gets a little bit more accurate and he keeps that same athletic mobility that he's had throughout his career at UCLA, I think you're looking at a pretty good prospect there. And honestly, I feel like he's got a pretty high ceiling. So I think that if they can get him in early day 3, that's probably who I'd go for.
All right. Well, here's what we're going to do next. So we have 2 shows before the draft. Next week, I want you to come on here as General Manager Frey with your mock draft of the Vikings and explained. You can probably finagle a trade of your choosing or do whatever you want, basically. And you tell me what you would do to enhance the Vikings long-term roster. And then the week after, the day before the draft, I'm going to have you put on your predictive mock draft brain and tell me what you expect to happen. And that'll probably be tied with something that you write as well, but you can put it on video. Does that sound all right?
Sounds great to me, man. Looking forward to it.
All right, man. We'll talk to you in 1 week.
Cool.